Okay. So let's take a look at the Indian format. Indian federalism. Okay. Now, we sort of have studied the Indian federal system already. If you remember, in the 4th unit, we studied a lesson called semi-federalism, right? And we studied the Indian system under that, right? Now, semi-federalism isn't really a thing. You basically divide the systems as federal and unitary. Semi-federalism is sort of like something that's in between. It's nonetheless a federal system, but it has some unitary features, right? Now, if we go with an example, right? Now, when it comes to uh, gender, sex, you basically have two genders, MOF, right? Male or female, right? But then you sometimes you have other identities called gays, lesbians, and all that. Now, sometimes you consider that as a third gender, but it turns out to be that typically they belong to one of the two, male or female. It just they turn out to be that they have features of the other gender as well. That it can be a male who has features of a female, or it could be a female who has the features of a male, right? So these also similar. Now you have unitary and federal. Basically, every constitution falls into one of the two. When you say semi-federal, it is a federal system nonetheless, but it has features of a unitary system. So when you are talking about federal system, you sort of emphasize on the fact that this specific federal system has features of uh, a unitary format as well. Now, if you remember that the Indian constitution does something very cunning, that they do not mention whether they are a federal or unitary constitution. Now, the problem with India is that as a country, they are too big to be controlled by unitary government. A unitary system can't handle India. It's really big, not only geographically, as a population, they are big. In terms of cultures, they are diverse. So, a solitary government really can't handle such a large country. So they have to go federal, but they can't go full board federal like the US does. That's because they are politically not very stable. So they have the risk of like countries breaking away as separate states because they already have an experience with Pakistan breaking away and then later Bangladesh breaking away from that. Because basically they've lost like a reasonable portion of their land mass and the population as a result of like separatism. So they don't want to go full board federal either. So therefore they've sort of adopted a system where it's federal, but it has a lot of unitary features which make sure that the central government has the upper hand. And in the constitution, they haven't really mentioned whether they are unitary or federal. So when you start the note Indian federalism, it has like a general introduction that when the constitution was adopted, and it's a long document that is technically the longest constitution in the world, and it has 29 states and all that, right? And in union territories, the difference between states and union territories is something that you all can read and understand, not that complex. And we need to basically the area we need to focus is this special features of Indian federalism, right? So we can identify following special features of the Indian federal system. Now, when you study this, you all can see this is most of these special features are pretty much the opposite to the system in the US, right? When you compare this with the US system, this is exactly the opposite most of the times, right? So the first one, the federal features of the Indian constitution are implicit in the constitution since it does not directly say it's federal. So first thing, right off the bat, the Indian federal system is implied. We are sort of supposed to read between the lines and understand, okay, this is a federal system. They don't directly say it's federal. They don't directly say whether they are unitary or federal either. They sort of imply to us that we are supposed to understand that it's a federal system. That's number one. Secondly, you have, although the constitution does not explicitly say that whether the system is federal or not, in its structure, it is a federal constitution. Of course, you have regional government units that have a reasonable amount of autonomy. So it is a federal system. The constitution divides the government structure between center and states, provides for the division of powers between the central and state governments. Right? Now, since you guys have already studied the provincial council system, you all know that there was a reason for our provincial council system to look very identical to the Indian federal system, right? It's pretty much the same because this was sort of forced on us by India, and this is what we have is like sort of like a carbon copy of the Indian federal system. 3 lists. First list comprising of powers of the regional government. Second list comprising of reserved powers, which is the powers of the central government, and third list being consisted of concurrent mutual powers. So India pretty much basically has the same system, and whatever the non-mentioned powers in either of the lists going to the central government yet again. Then the constitution also has unitary features. The central government's powers over the state governments, and especially the powers to dissolve them, are examples. This has led some commentators to say that the Indian system is semi-federal. This is the whole point. It has unitary features. It has many unitary features, but for the most important one is that the central government has the power to dissolve these state governments. Like they can basically dissolve any state legislature, right? And this has led some political commentators to say that they are not even full federal, they are semi-federal. However, in recent decades, the Indian system has acquired more federal features due to several reasons. So you can see, while the US Constitution, which is in the extreme end of federalism, they are sort of coming towards, they have taken a few steps towards making the central government strong. India is the other way around. They've been the other extreme end of state governments being really weak, and they have taken a few steps towards this way to be a little more powerful in terms of state governments. You can see, first of all, the state governments run by political parties other than those who control the central government have consistently demanded and fought for greater autonomy for the states. Now, the ones who did the Indian political party system, then when we studied the second unit, we learned that India has a one-party dominating multi-party system. So in that we learned that the Congress party is the one that's a gigantic party in India, and all the other parties are quite powerful in their regional units only. So most of the times back then, it was the Congress party that was in power in the central government, but the regions were sort of ran by other parties other than the Congress party. And when you have an adverse party running a state government, they constantly fight for more and more powers for the states. And in Indian politics, many regional parties have come into powers in state governments. They are more committed to the regional autonomy than the Congress party or the Bharatiya Janata party now. Other than the Congress party, the other second most powerful party, which is like way behind the Congress party, by the way, but still the second in second highest number of seats are obtained by the Bharatiya Janata party of Narendra Modi. Now, however, these other parties who have regional power. Now, I mentioned to you in the Bengali side, the Communist Party has somewhat of power. Now, these parties have been fighting for more and more autonomy for their regions. Then see an important recent development in the willingness of the Indian Supreme Court to interpret the. Okay, this is a long point. I'll give you the basic idea. In recent times, the Indian Supreme Court has been interpreting the Constitution in a way, giving judicial decisions in a way in favor of the state governments. So the Indian Supreme Court have been recently giving judgments claiming that the claims that were made by the states that they have more power, is is justifiable. So basically the court decisions by the Supreme Court, Indian Supreme Court, recent times, they have granted more and more powers to Indian states, right? This one is important. Asymmetrical power sharing, highlight that part. Asymmetrical power sharing is another special feature of the Indian federalism. What it means that all federal units do not have the same level of powers. Some have more powers than the others due to several reasons, right? So they don't have the same level of powers or competencies. Now, this is a clear difference from the American system, because America, you have symmetrical power sharing. Here you have asymmetrical power sharing. Some of the states are reasonably powerful and some of the states are not. Some states are given. Now, there's an example given like Jammu, Kashmir, Punjab, Goa, Assam. They have mentioned that some of the states have more power, some of the states have lesser power. The next point is, India has been able to create new states relatively peacefully despite protests, right? So, and there's some examples of new states being born. That's why back then, India had 26 states when the Indo-Lanka Peace Accord was signed, and now they have 29. So new states are being born at a reasonable pace, and these things are happening peacefully without fights. Then the next point, we can also observe that the Indian federal system is in process of evolution, in which the state governments are acquiring more regional autonomy than the originally. Not sure why this is given as a separate point again, because this is what pretty much we've been talking about. And then one major reason for strengthening federal features of the Indian system is the general recognition by the people that the constitution and the political system should reflect India's diversity and pluralism. So basically what this point means is that in India, the society is very plural. So as a result of that, the constitution itself should define that, and regions should have more autonomy to protect that diversity. That's the basic idea of this, right? Then you have this note, which is the foundation on the Indian federal system, that explains, this is again like, this is basically the structure. This is basically the structure of the Indian federal system, how the Indian federal system is founded. Okay. Can one of you all volunteer to read this note? Kezia, can you read this note?
Okay, sir. The foundations part, right?
Yes.
Okay. Foundations on Indian federal system. The foundations of Indian federal system can be discussed under the following 6 headings: strong center, flexibility, law-making powers, financial relations, administrative relations, interstate conflicts. First one, strong central government. Because of the territorial vastness of India, a unitary and centralized model of government does not suit India. Federalism was thus seen as the best alternative. At the same time, there were reasons for a strong central government. They are international experiences of having a strong center, the US, Australia, and Canada in federalism, the fear of India's territorial disintegration in the light of the partition of India at the time of independence, the emphasis on national security because of the dispute with wars with Pakistan, continuation of the centralized administrative system established by the British colonial rulers. The relative strength of India's central government depends on its legislative and financial powers, emergency powers, and the ability to enact legislation for the states under certain circumstances. Because of the strong center, the Indian federalism is often called a semi-federal system. Second one, flexibility. The flexibility of Indian federalism arises from the fact that when required, the central government can override state governments it does not require constitutional amendments. Even when a constitutional amendment required, the process is not too rigid. It requires only a special majority in both houses of the parliament and the consent of half of the state governments. The center can also decide the number of states of the union. Initially, there were only 17 states based on the linguistic identity. Now there are 29 states, many of which were created after the constitution was adapted to reflect the ethnic, religious, and regional diversities. A key conceptual feature of the Indian political culture is that the constitution and the system of government should accommodate India's ethnic, linguistic, religious, and cultural diversities. Third, the law making powers. A key feature of any federal system is the division of legislative power between the center and the states. India has three lists that enumerate the division of legislative powers. They are the central list with 97 subjects that details powers of the central legislature. Second, state list with 66 subjects. Third, a concurrent list with 47 subjects detailing shared lawmaking powers between the central and state legislatures. Legislative powers of the center includes defense, foreign affairs, communication, finance, taxation, foreign and interstate trade, registration of companies, banking and insurance, petroleum, mines, certain educational institutions, and health. The concurrent list includes social welfare, labor, trade monopolies, control of essential goods, and social and economic matters. When there is a conflict between the center and the states on the legislative powers under the concurrent list, the laws of the center will prevail. Lawmaking powers of the state legislatures are not extensive. However, their powers are closely linked to the everyday life of the people. Maintenance of law and order, agriculture and irrigation are most important powers. The state subject list also includes education, networks, and trade and commerce. The states can also make laws relating subjects in the concurrent list. However, if there is a conflict between the central and state laws on any subject in concurrent list, the central law is considered valid. In a normal federal system, the division of powers between the central and state provinces is not flexible. One unit cannot intrude into the competence of the other. The constitutional amendment process is also rigid. However, in the Indian system, there is flexibility. The fairly long concurrent list of powers is one reason for this flexibility. With President's approval, state laws can be valid even when they clash with central laws. Emergency powers under Article 352 enables the central to enact laws for the state governments. Similarly, the central can pass legislation under subjects allocated for the states in the state list if such legislation is approved by in the Rajya Sabha with a two-third majority. Such laws could be valid only for a period of 1 year. However, they can be extended every year for another year with the approval of the Rajya Sabha. An example is the Supplies of the Goods and Pricing Act of 1950. The national parliament can also control the powers of states to some extent. If a state government acquires private property and returns the ownership of property, such actions require the approval of the president. In some instances, the state governor can reserve the laws passed by the state legislature for the approval of the president. Fourth one, center-state, central-state financial relations. For a federal system to succeed, both the central government and the state governments should have adequate finances and financial resources. The Indian Constitution clearly provides for central and state finances. When a tax basis covers two or more states, the central government has power for taxation. When there is uniform taxation throughout the country, powers over such taxation are with the center. State governments also have taxation powers on subjects as specified in the Constitution. Taxation power of the central government includes non-agricultural taxes, customs duties, excise duties, company duties, capital levy, property taxes, taxation on interstate trade, death duties, stamp duties, tax on buying and selling of goods, newspaper tax, and tax on the share market and money market. State governments have the following taxation powers: land tax, tax from income from land, property tax, agricultural tax, tax from agricultural property, and tax on okay, that's some drugs. Because of the clear division of taxation powers, there is no conflict between the central and state governments over taxation. However, there is a problem. Often state governments have less tax income. In order to resolve this problem, tax income is shared between the central and the states. There is also the system of financial grants from the central governments to state governments to fill the income shortfalls. This process is facilitated by an independent finance commission. Its main task is making recommendations for the sharing of tax income and making grants to state governments. Center-state administrative relations. The Indian system of administration is organized in such a way that the central government can implement its powers throughout the country. If necessary, the central government can ask state governments to implement its policies. State governments also have their own institutions of public administration. When the need arises, the state government can ask the central to implement their policies through the central bureaucracy. This particularly applies to subjects in the concurrent list. The central government also has the authority to guide the public administration in the state governments. Central government uses this authority specifically on national policy matters. Sixth, intergovernment disputes. The Supreme Court's role is crucial for the resolution of disputes and conflicts among states as well as between the central and the states. It has constitutionally sanctioned powers to do so. The President can also seek the opinion of the Supreme Court on any intergovernmental dispute. It is the responsibility of the central government to resolve interstate conflict on water resources. The Interstate Council is another body with the responsibility of resolving interstate conflicts. The Council is appointed by the President. The Council's task is to inquire into interstate conflicts, find out causes of the conflict, and make recommendations for their resolution. Unitarist features. There are also instances when the Indian federal system comes closer to the unitary system. They are, first, emergency powers. The emergency powers under Article 352 to 360 enable the central government to act like a unitary government. According to these emergency regulations, the President can declare a state of emergency in situations of internal or external emergency. If the two houses of parliament do not approve the emergency, it ends within 2 months. When the emergency is in operation, the central government can pass laws on any state subject. This situation has led to many criticisms within India because the central government has used emergency powers to dissolve state governments run by opposing political parties. The Supreme Court has invalidated such dissolution of state governments a number of times. Second point, financial emergencies. These powers can be exercised by the central government when the country faces economic or financial emergency. Third point, collapse of constitutional process. When the central government decides that the constitutional mechanisms have collapsed in any state, the central government can declare a state of emergency and bring the state under the central government.
Right. Thanks, Kezia. Now, before we discuss anything else, right? The seventh point we talked about, unitarist features. Unitarist features, if the teacher's guide version you have is an old version, there's a typo there. If it says unitarist features, then okay. Some of the books may have, I kid you not, some of the books may have this as guitarist features. Okay, you can see I had that version first. The guitarist features, I had to make it unitary features or unitarist features. Okay, so first of all, if you have that typo, fix that, right? Then if you want, you can write these in a separate paper or here in front of the point as well. I'm just going to give you like a like an explanation of each of these points in 1 or 2 sentences, so it's easier for you to remember. So when it comes to strong central governments, that what you can basically say is the Indian federal system has a power division method which favors the central government. The Indian federal system has a power division method which favors the central government. Okay, so much so that Indian federalism is sometimes called semi-federalism. Okay, that's the first one. Second, you have flexibility. By flexibility, what you mean is that in India, the central government can override state governments without a constitutional amendment. Okay. Now, in the USA, if you want to override a state, the central government has to change the constitution. Here, you can override the states without amending the constitution. That's the basic idea. You can simply disagree and just demolish a state just by having a simple majority in both houses of the parliament. And half of the state governments, even in terms of a constitutional amendment, right? Even if you want to amend the constitution, half of the states, if the half of the states agree, and you have a simple majority in the both houses of the central legislature, constitution is amended. And the point is, you don't even need a constitutional amendment. You can just override it as the central government prefers, right? Then the third one, lawmaking process. The basic idea is that the power division is based on 3 lists. You guys are no stranger to this because we studied the provincial council system, which is very similar. And you can see the central government list. The note says central list. It should be central government list. Huh? Central government list with 97 powers, state list with 66 powers, concurrent list with 47 powers. I know, Milinda, what you are thinking right now. You don't need to remember these numbers, but if you do, it's better. It's better if you can remember that state central government list has 97 powers, state list has 66 powers, and concurrent list has 47 powers. If you remember that, you can flex in the paper by mentioning these, which may result in 1 more additional mark. That's the basic idea. And yes, Kevin.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So in the Indian Constitution, you said that the in terms of flexibility that the central government can override the state governments, no, sir?
Yes. Yes.
So in comparison, the American Constitution, they need a constitutional amendment, like in times of
Yes.
emergency and all.
In terms of emergency also, in terms of emergency is an exception, right? But in India, it doesn't really have to be an emergency, right? So comparing to the Indian flexibility, USA has rigidity, which we studied as a basic feature in the previous talk. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Right. So the third point is lawmaking process. The powers are divided under 3 lists, right? And if you mention is 97, 66, and 47. And if you, the following note basically explains what sort of areas come under this. There's something you can even think with common sense and right. Okay, and you will remember this because this is very similar to the Sri Lankan Provincial Council system. And these ideas about like Article 352 and Rajya Sabha having a 2/3 majority, I was like, it's not that important. It is important, but it's not necessary to go into that much of details, especially if it's a 10-mark question. Okay, so you just basically need to explain the lawmaking powers and how the powers are divided on the 3 lists. Then, of course, center-state financial relations and center-state administrative relations. Basically, the 4th point explains that when it comes to the finances of the country, the central government has the upper hand. And then the 5th one, center-state administrative relations, is basically means when it comes to the administration also, the central government has the upper hand, right? So financial relations, as you can see in the note, they mentioned that the taxing and all these things, you can see land, property tax, agriculture tax, and all these things. The taxation and all the important financial areas are handled by the central government. And then you have the administrative relations, which means the administration system is also sort of like handled by the central government. So, you know, the basic appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, terminations, those areas are handled by the central government. Then you have intergovernment disputes. The 6th one, basically what you need to know there is like, you know, basically in any federal system, the states can get into conflicts. And in terms of conflicts between states, there are 2 mechanisms they normally follow. One is the Supreme Court getting involved and doing the conflict resolution among the states, or else you can see that you can appoint a council, which is appointed by the president. The council's task is to inquire interstate conflicts and make recommendations for their resolutions, right? So either the Supreme Court can handle intergovernment disputes, or a council appointed by the president can do an investigation and give recommendations how to tackle that situation. And of course, unitarist features is basically the idea that when the Indian constitution, when the Indian, what do you call that? Indian federal system transforms into an unitary system. Under what circumstances? That's what you need to explain in the 7th one. First, you have emergency powers. In case of an emergency, like if a war comes, if an invasion comes, the entire country is under chaos, of course, then the central government quickly takes over everything, and the central government is in charge. State governments are no more, right? It says the president can declare a state of emergency in situation of internal or external emergency. Now, when you say president can declare, you know, India has a cabinet system, so which means basically the prime minister is the one who makes the decision, and president just makes it official. Then you have financial emergencies. This comes under when a financial emergency occurs. Then the collapse of constitutional process means when it comes to like if you feel like some state is going through too much of administration corruption and all that, the president and like the central government can take over that particular state. So the easiest way to remember is first one, emergency situation throughout India. Second one, financial situation throughout India. Third one, emergency situation within a state. But this emergency means that means the regional government has failed. Third one is basically a situation where the state government has failed to keep things under control. That's what you mean, the collapse of the constitutional process. If the chief minister of a certain state is acting all dictator, then the central government can take over. Okay, right. So as usual, before we move on to Switzerland, any questions? No, cool. Okay, so 5 minutes break and we'll move on to Switzerland.